Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 3 of OK For Now, read by yours truly, Mr. Hart. Today, as a quick recap, let's just talk about what we've read about in the first two chapters. Our main character, Doug, has moved to Marysville. Once again, he's got kind of a verbally and physically abusive father, a loving mother, and two brothers, one of which is off at war, the other one who's at home and also very abusive and kind of rude. Doug has begun working as a delivery boy for Spicer's Deli. He has been taking food all around town. One person in particular who he met, who he had kind of a rocky start with, was a lady named Miss Merriam. Miss Merriam is definitely a cranky old woman who she writes plays for a living. Yeah, that's kind of where we left off here last time. Doug spent most of the chapter kind of getting introduced to the whole job of going around and doing that. So we're going to begin now. If we want to look here, we will see that in the opening chapter, the chapter is called The Large-Billed Puffin, and that would be the picture there of the large-billed puffin. And once again, keep this picture in mind and try to think to yourself, okay, how does this picture relate to the chapter that Mr. Hart is reading here? Before I begin, I just want to say I hope everybody is having a good had a good first week. I know the quarantine is not easy for any of us. Kids, just know that we are all in this together, even if it is on the online format like this. Definitely, guys, keep posting on the wall, keep reaching out if you guys have any questions. Myself and all the other teachers are definitely here for you. So with that, let's get into Chapter 3, shall we? The Large-Billed Puffin, Chapter 3, Plate CCXCIII. Okay, so I'm going to go to the library every Saturday. So what? So what? It's not like I'm reading books or anything. I went every Saturday because I had a lot to get in. There were only 3 weeks left in August and then a few days in September before stupid Washington Irving Junior High School of stupid Marysville, New York was scheduled to open its stupid doors and suck us away from summer. Only 3 weeks! And there was a lot to learn. We'll start with contour lines, Mr. Powell said. And that first Saturday, put your hand up on the paper. No, higher up. The paper is the same size as the page in Audubon's books, so you want to try for the same proportions. Look at the turn. Good. Now draw the outline of the bird. You don't need to look at your paper. Bring your line down from the first tip. Not quite so slowly. Bring it all the way down to the beak. I brought the line all the way down to the beak. Now, start on the right side and let's do the same thing. Bring the line all the way down to the beak. No. Don't look at the paper. That's it. How am I going to make the lines meet if I don't look at the paper? You're not. I finished the right side of the bird and I looked at the paper. That just doesn't look much like a bird, I said. Not yet, it doesn't. It looks more like I'm showing what isn't the bird. Mr. Powell put his hand over mine and stopped it. I looked up at him and he had a smile on his face. It wasn't like my mother's smile, but it was an okay smile. That's right, Mr. Switek. That's exactly what you're doing. Most young artists take a long time to understand that. So let's try it again. Turn the sheet over. This time, let's go a little faster with the lines. And as you start, that's it right there. As you start, think about the line is sending out information about that bird. How the air is moving over the feathers. How are those feathers stirring? How fast is the bird traveling? Fast, I said. Keep that in mind as you're bringing the line down. So I brought the line down. Stop! Mr. Powell whispered. You're about to come to the front edge of the wing, right? I nodded. Think about how the air is hitting that edge. Okay, you're probably not going to believe this, but when I did think about it, I really could feel that air on my shoulders. I'm not lying. Press down harder on your pencil to show how it feels. And I did. Harder. You won't break that point. Harder. The right side, the same thing. And I did it again. Mr. Powell nodded. Now, Mr. Switek, let's bring in the neck and the head and the beak. We'll let this white space here between the wings, the lines, be the body. So imagine a neck extending out from the space. Put your pencil where you'll be going. Very good. Now bring your line down. A little faster. Audubon worked with curves on his bird. So that's what you're going to want to work with. Let it come around. Yes, just so. Now bring your pencil to where you're going to start on the right side. No, look at the picture. You see how Audubon started this wing down a little lower? Why do you think he did that? Because if the wings were at the same height, he'd look like he was hanging stuff in a museum somewhere. Mr. Powell smiled again. You're talking about something called composition. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Draw that right line a little faster. We filled all 3 sheets of paper, front and back. And I think we could have filled a whole bunch more if Miss Merriam hadn't come up and reminded Mr. Powell that there were other patrons in the Marysville Free Public Library, not to mention all the cataloging for the new books from the Hotland Mifflin. And she couldn't do it all by herself, and she couldn't also check in books in and out too. Could she? Oh, of course not, said Mr. Powell, even though she probably could if she put her loop glasses on and actually got to it instead of complaining to us. That'll be the end of your first lesson, said Mr. Powell. And he looked over the drawings. Take this one home. Here's something a little advanced for you, but I'm curious. See if you can figure out how to draw in the feathers. Think of it as the problem to be solved. He rolled the paper up into a scroll and he handed it to me. Take the pencils. I'll clean the rest up. Right now, I gotta go catalog. And when I came into the cool of the library that afternoon, it was only 3:30 and no one else was even in the whole place as far as I could see. So I don't know what Mrs. Everything Has to Be Cataloged this very second Merriam was all fussed up about. Along the line of my thumb, there was a dark streak from the pencil, and I decided I couldn't wash my hands for a while to see if I could make it last. And by the way, in case you were paying attention, or if you weren't paying attention or something, did you catch what Mr. Powell called me? That's right. He said you were a young artist. I bet you missed when he called me that, didn't you? And that night, I worked on the feathers before my brother came up to bed, which wasn't easy because I didn't have a desk, so I had to use the floor. And I didn't have much time because my brother would come up any second, like during that Marlboro commercial, and he'd find me on the floor and he'd say something like, "What do you think you're doing?" And wouldn't matter what I said because he'd just tear the paper into shreds and then be outside in some gutter somewhere, just like Joe Pepitone's hat. So I had to work fast. So I started on the left wing, and I figured out that I could get these lines by angling the pencil up. I tried to remember the rows on the turn, how the feathers on the wings got larger as they moved down, how they slanted a little bit into the body, how they kind of jumbled together before the long tail feathers, how the feathers were different, rounder before they suddenly speared into the tail, how the wing feathers were long and sharp, but the feathers on the body were like whispers. You think it's easy trying to remember all that? You think it's do you think it's easy trying to draw it all? Well, let me tell you, it isn't. It's not easy. I messed up a whole lot on that left wing. I think I got the rows right, but I got all the feathers lines too close or something, and so when I curved them around, they looked like a kid in a kindergarten practicing sixes. You couldn't imagine them brushing up against the air, that's for sure. So I tried the feathers on the body, and I think I got those okay. You had to use the lighter strokes, the very lightest, but even though it looked good from far away, the closer you got, the worse it was. So I started on the right wing, and the whole thing started to look all messed up again, until I finally figured it out. You can't draw every feather. You just can't. I bet you hadn't thought of that either. So for the bottom rows of the bigger feathers, I just drew a few lines and I curved them in. And I think it was right. You can imagine these feathers moving in the air. You really could. I looked at the feathers and I rolled the paper up to hide it beneath my bed. And I rolled it to look like the feathers again. And finally I rolled it up and I hid it beneath the bed. And then I turned out the light and I laid down with my hands with that pencil smudge on my thumb back behind my head. And I looked out the window. There was still a little bit of light left in that summer sky. And the birds were having a riot before turning in. And a few stars were starting up. I couldn't keep myself from smiling. I just couldn't. Maybe this happens to you every day, but I think it was the first time I could hardly wait to show something that I'd done to someone who could care besides my mother. Do you know how that feels, to have someone care? So that's why I went to Marysville Free Public Library every Saturday for the rest of August and well on into September. Not to read any books or anything stupid like that. September. Washington Irving Junior High School. The first Monday of September was the night of all the new kids would be able to come to Washington Irving Junior High School to get acquainted, which meant a whole bunch of 7th graders who had probably lived in stupid Marysville their whole lives, and one 8th grader that had just moved to town. Me. Terrific. I went with my mother, who got all dressed up like she was heading for Mass, and who held my hand until we got close, when people might see. Washington Irving Junior High School looked like the same people who built the Marysville Free Public Library built it. There were 6 steps, again, and columns, one on each side of the door, then marble floors once you got inside, which made everything cold and echoey. We all headed into the auditorium, and everyone seemed to know everyone else, probably because they'd all been in the same elementary school since the 1st grade. Even the mothers, who were all wearing these dresses and looked a whole lot cooler than what my mother was wearing, acted like they all had known each other since, well, forever. So we sat pretty much by ourselves. We didn't talk. My mother took off her hat and held it in her hands, and she took off her gloves too. And at 7 o'clock, the principal got up and welcomed us to an exciting new year of growth and opportunity at Washington Irving Junior High School. His name was Principal Petey. I'm not lying. And when Principal Petey was up there trying to keep us all in line, he said, we were supposed to laugh politely at that, and all the mothers did, even mine, after she saw that she was supposed to. Principal Petey would like to introduce the teachers, he said. So the whole front row of them stood and they turned towards us. There were only a couple of teachers who looked happy to be introduced. The rest looked like they knew they still had a couple of days left, only a couple of days left of summer freedom coming, and they sure didn't want to start thinking about school any more than we did. And after they sat down, Principal Petey announced the school theme for the year. Washington Irving Junior High, catch the spirit. And then he called on a bunch of 9th graders who are all wearing that same orange t-shirt with the school theme on it. Washington Irving Junior High, catch the spirit. And they handed out a stack of dittos. And for the next 30 minutes, Principal Petey stood on the stage and he read them to us. The heat trapped inside the auditorium during that whole stupid summer turned up a degree or two with each new ditto. And after that, even the 9th graders who had caught the stupid spirit were pretty much just drooping. Principal Petey announced that parents were to stay in the auditorium for an informational session on school expectations, as well as a discussion of what supplies they would need to provide in a year of austerity budgets. Students, meanwhile, were to go to their classrooms for small group sessions that Principal Petey and Mr. Ferris would be leading in just a few minutes. I leaned close to my mother. Let's just go, I said. She smiled. We should stay for the whole thing, she said. I'll see you afterwards. And so I went out of the auditorium, and one of the spirit-filled 9th graders asked me what my last name was, and she pointed to the room I was supposed to go to. And on I went, and I sat down with a bunch of 7th graders whose last name started from M to Z, and they all knew one another. Terrific. So we waited on the scrub-clean desks, and guess who had no one to talk to? So we waited, and I looked around for a pen so the desk wouldn't be so scrubbed clean. But finally, Principal Petey came in. He had this huge smile trapped across his face, like seeing us was making him the happiest man on earth. This will take just a few minutes, he said, and he handed us a ditto. Principal Petey wants to go over a few rules with you so we can get started on the right foot. Principal Petey thinks that he recognized most of you from looking forward to junior high school day last May. But some of you might be new to our town, and some of you may come from different school systems. He looked around. Or at least one of you may. Guess who? We all need to know what to expect from each other in a couple of weeks, so no one says to Principal Petey, Principal Petey, I didn't know. He found a kid in the second row. Tell Principal Petey your name, he said. Lee, he said. Your entire name. Lee Rostrom. Are you John's brother? Lee Rostrom nodded happily. Principal Petey is sure we'll get along fine then, Lee. Why don't you read that first roll on the sheet? Lee Rostrom smothered his ditto out on the desk. School begins with homework each morning starting at 10. Each student should be in his seat ready for the day. Thank you, Lee, said Principal Petey. And 8 means 8, not 8:10 means 8:10, not 8:11 or 8:12 or 8:13. His eyes roamed around the room. What's your name? He asked. Lester Shannon. Lester, would you read the next rule? And that's how it went. There are rules about the time between classes, about lockers, about combination locks, and not giving your combination to anyone except for Principal Petey if Principal Petey asked for it. And about lunch, and about making sure your shirt was tucked into your pants for boys, and skirts had to be no more than a handbreadth from their knees for the girls. And always wearing socks, and about how long a boy's hair should be. Principal Petey looked at me when this got read aloud, and about how we were to address teachers, and even about how many times we should be able to go to the bathroom in one day. I'm not lying. They have rules about going to the bathroom here. And after the bathroom rules, Principal Petey roamed around again and again, and he called on me. What's your name? Doug Swiatek. Douglas, will you read the next rule? Doug Swiatek has a question, I said. I know. I was sounding like Lucas again, wasn't I, being a jerk. Principal Petey frowned at this. I guess he didn't like questions. Suppose Doug Swiatek has to go to the bathroom more than 3 times. Principal Petey set his ditto down on the desk in front of him. Then Doug Swiatek would need to see the nurse, said Principal Petey. Well, how's that going to help? I said. Every kid in the kid laughed at this, and every one of them laughed. Everyone. Principal Petey, though, he did not laugh. Read the next rule, he said. And I looked down at the sheet. I think Doug Swiatek has to go to the bathroom now, but he'll only need to go once, probably. He's pretty sure anyway. Exploding laughter all of a sudden began all over the place. But once again, Principal Petey, he did not laugh. Then Douglas may go to the bathroom. So I stood up. And while he's there, he should see that his t-shirt is properly tucked in. He may as well get in the habit now. And he might think about it when he's going to get his hair cut, since I don't let boys who look like girls in my school. More exploding laughter all over the place. What a jerk. So I left, and Principal Petey closed the door behind me. And on the way to the bathroom, I saw where all the classroom kids from A to L went. They were all quiet, and they kind of were sitting forward, and I could see Mr. Ferris's voice. Within a year, possibly by next fall, something that has never happened before will be done. NASA is going to be sending men to the moon. Think about that. Men who are once in this classrooms just like this will leave their footprints on the lunar surface. He paused. I leaned in close against the wall so I could hear him. And that's why you're sitting here tonight, and why you will be coming in here in the months ahead. You will come in here to dream dreams. You come to build fantastic castles up into the air. And you come to learn how to build the foundations that make those castles real. And when the men who will command that mission were boys at your age, no one knew what they would one day walk on another world someday. No one knew that. But in a few months, that's exactly what will happen. So 20 years from now, what will people say about you? No one knew then that this kid from Washington Junior High School would grow up to do. They didn't know what they would grow up to do. What castles will you kids be able to build? After the deliveries next Saturday, I decided to see... Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I skipped a page. I didn't go to the bathroom. I just waited outside the auditorium for my mother to come out. And when she did, we went through the lobby doors and I looked up at the moon. Then we headed on home by the way of the ice cream place around the corner and down a block from the library. And at that moment, we had black and whites, my mother and me. And I got to pay for them. Do you know what that felt like? To pay for something for my mom? My brother came upstairs that night while I was thinking about Audubon's birds and buying black and whites for my mother and planting daisies with Lil Spicer and looking out the window at the spectacular moon. Remember how I said that whenever you're feeling good, something's always happens to happen to wreck it all? Do you remember when I said that? Hey, Duggo, he said. I think you can figure out for yourself how my brother said Duggo. Hey, Duggo, what are you doing for yourself these days? Nothing, I said. That's not what I heard. I heard you were going to the library. So? He started to laugh the way you'd imagine someone with a twisted criminal mind would laugh. So you don't even know how to read, he said. I do too know how to read. That twisted criminal mind laughed again. Yo, Duggo, if you had to read directions to pee in a toilet, we'd be spreading newspapers for you all over the house. Okay, here comes this weird moment. I know I should have jumped off the bed and stomped across the room and flattened him against the wall and punched his lights out. Now let's see you read, I would have said at that moment. If Joe Pepito had been in that room right then, that's exactly what he would have done. I guarantee it. But I didn't think about it at first. At first, all I could think about was that Arctic tern heading down in that water about to crash. His neck yanked back because he knows he's going to smack into it. And the eye. And then, and this is the even weirder part, I thought of Lucas and wondered where he was and if he was looking out from wherever he was and if he was seeing the spectacular moon like I was seeing. Then my brother, my stupid brother, took off his stupid sweaty socks and he lobbed them over at me. Hold on to these until I need them tomorrow, he said. And I threw them on the floor. More twisted criminal laughter came after that. It's all right, Duggo. Don't get mad. I'm sure lots of kids in the 8th grade can't read. And I turned over. He was snoring a long time before I finally fell asleep. After deliveries the next Saturday, I decided to see if the Marysville Free Public Library had a back door, in case someone with a twisted criminal mind was waiting for me out front. It turns out that the library did have a back door, but it was locked, of course. But it didn't matter. My brother wasn't waiting for me out front. Probably the pack had found some new place to prowl. So I climbed the 6 steps and I went in by the front door, and Miss Marion was at her desk cataloging like crazy because I guess it's the most important thing to do in the whole wide world. She had her loopy glasses on, and when she looked up and saw me, she smiled. Well, sort of. It was the kind of smile that said, I know something you don't know. The kind of smile my brother would get when he knew that my father was looking for me. The smile of a twisted criminal mind. But who knows, maybe something lousy had just happened to her. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she hated stupid Marysville now, too. Who knows? So maybe I could once try to be nice to her. Just once. What did I have to lose? Hey, Miss Miriam, I said, pretty cool. Hey, yourself. You're not always going to get everything you want, you know. That's not what life is like. Maybe after today you'll understand that. See what trying to be getting nice gets you? So I went upstairs to see if Mr. Powell was with that Arctic tern. I held the rolled paper out of my hand, the one with all the feathers. You don't need to run up the stairs. You don't need to run up the stairs, hollered Miss Miriam. Mr. Powell was by the case, looking down at it. His hands were on the glass like he was trying to press it down. Hi, Mr. Powell. He looked up. Hello, Mr. Switek. He puffed his breath out and ruffled the light hairs all around his face. How'd the problem with those feathers go? I think I solved it, but it took a few tries, that's for sure. That's how it should be. Let's see. He took a couple of steps towards me and he reached out for my hand. And that's when I knew something was wrong. He should have asked me to spread the paper across the glass so we could compare what I did with what Audubon did. But he was reaching out his hand. So I handed him the paper and then walked over to the glass case and I looked inside. But the Arctic tern was gone. Mr. Switek, Mr. Powell said. But I just looked at him. They're large-billed puffins, he said. I looked down into the case. Whatever they were, these birds were chumps. Fat-bodied, thick-legged, and looking as dumb as a bird could possibly be and still be able to breathe. One looked like he had just fallen to the water and was doing everything he could to keep his face from getting wet. The other one was on lane, stood there watching like a jerk as if he didn't even care that the other one was bobbing up and down, trying not to drown. Probably he was too stupid to care, or maybe he had a twisted criminal mind and that's why he didn't care. I know, they're a little bit different than the Arctic tern, aren't they? A little bit different? A little bit different? I don't know, you take away the sleek white feathers of the tern and you put on stubby dark ones. You take away the pointed wings and stick on a dumb oval wings. Then you take away the long neck and throw in a body like an old football and stick a stupid yellow cup over the stupid bird's face instead of a pointed beak. And I guess, yeah, the puffins, they do look a little different, Mr. Powell. Sure. Mr. Powell walked over to the case and looked down at the puffins. It was about time to change the page anyway. He shook his head and coughed slightly. I thought I'd show you some elements of texture since you're already getting into it. Let's take a look at what you did with those feathers first. You didn't just change the page, I said. No, I didn't. He spread my page over to stupid large-billed puffins. He pointed at the left wing. I see you figured out the problem pretty quickly. You can't draw in every feather. They start to look like nothing but a bunch of lines next to each other. His hand moved over to the bottom rows of the right wings. Tell me what you did here. I drew a few lines to show how the feathers curve in. And that is what an artist does. You're right, you can't draw on every feather, but you can draw on the patterning of the feathers, so I can see that they are shaped and how they lie in the bird's body. And when you draw on the pattern, your viewer's eyes will fill in the rest. Now look at this. He took an eraser out of the pocket and rubbed out one of the lines for the tern's body. Draw in those feathers like you've done the others. I don't have a line to show where they stop, though. That's right, so you're just going to have to suggest it. So I drew, and while the large-billed puffins bobbed in the water below me like a chumps they were, and by the time I was done, Mr. Powell had erased all the lines, and my tern's feathers were plunging against the air like all get out. Mr. Powell asked if he could keep my drawing. Do you know how that made me feel when he asked to keep my drawing? A few nights before Washington Irving Junior High School was doomed to start, Spicer's Deli on Main Street, Maryland got broken into. It happened someday after 10 o'clock. And in case you were wondering, my jerk brother was home then and for the rest of the night. And if you were wondering, you weren't the only one who was wondering. Because Mr. Spicer was wondering too. And so were the policemen who were sent to find my brother. They came in the next day when my mother and I were washing up the dishes after breakfast. They were mostly polite, probably because my father was out somewhere with Ernie Echo and he wasn't there with a whole lot to say and letting himself say it. So my mother did the talking. No, she hadn't heard that Spicer's Deli was robbed last night. No, she had never shopped there, but her younger son worked for Mr. Spicer. She did not know Mr. Spicer, and she had no idea why he would think that her son had anything to do with the robbery. Yes, she knew exactly where he had been last night. He had been home. No, she had not gone after 9 o'clock. Yes, she was sure of that. Yes, she was so very sure of that. Yes, very sure. The two policemen did not look so sure, though. They just looked at me. Yes, I know Spicer Deli. I work there. No, I didn't hear my brother go out last night. No, I'd never seen him anywhere near Spicer's Deli. Nope. I was sure. Never. Just ask him. The policemen said they would do that. Did I have any idea where he might be right now? But I didn't know where he was. And my mom didn't know where he was either. They looked at each other. They said they'd ride around some, and if that was okay, they would, with my mother, they'd ask my brother the same questions if they'd happen to see him, that is. My mother said that would be fine. And when they left, she leaned against the sink, and her breathing was quick and short. Dougie, you don't think? He was here all night, I said. And she looked at me. He was, I said. He was here, Mom. And in case you think I'm lying because the lie I told you about not seeing him at the deli, which, by the way, isn't that big a lie, and the one you probably would tell, and it would be a lie you, I bet, would tell too if you were in my position. I know that he didn't leave last night because I was awake for most of it. I was awake with a flashlight drawing the tern's feathers again, just the way they were supposed to be. On a new page, I drew in the body lines lightly, and then I erased them as I went. The feathers came out pretty good. You could feel them moving through the air. They were moving the way no stupid large-billed puffin's feathers could ever move. And I'm not lying. And so my brother didn't rob Spicer's Deli, no matter who says it. This didn't matter a whole lot, though, to my father, who came home really late with Ernie Echo after someone told him that he'd seen the police talking to his son. I heard the door slam open and the feet on the stairs, taking them two at a time, and him calling for my brother, who probably wished he hadn't come home that night at all, who just sat up his bed and said, "I did it!" And that was when my father was on him. I guess I should have been happy with what happened to him, like he was always happy when something like that happened to me. But when I saw my brother's face when my father flipped on the light switch, and at that moment I saw his terrified eyes, and let's just say, I wasn't happy. Look at the way the Audubon has arranged the two puffins, said Mr. Powell. You mean the two stupid puffins, I said. All right, the two stupid puffins. Remember, the turn. Remember how everything was pointing down? The horizon line, the very bottom of the painting. But you or I hardly saw it. That's what's different about the setting of this painting, though. You mean except for that stupid fat birds? Yes, Mr. Swidesick, except for the two stupid fat birds. Well, I guess the horizon is halfway up the painting, I said. That's right, and if you drew lines on them from these rocks, do you see how they would go across the page just like the horizon? So everything is going to go to the side instead of up and down? Good, good. That's thinking like an artist. Now put one finger on the tail feathers of the bird on the left. Now another on the forefoot of the one on the right. I'll put my finger at the top of the head of the left bird, and we've made a perfect triangle. Right, right. And a triangle whose longest side is at the bottom. So what is different about this feel of this painting? Except for the two stupid fat birds. I shrugged. Well, not much is moving here. Not just that. What else? Think like an artist. Think of everything in the painting, not just the birds. And then I saw it. The long horizons, that stupid flat lines, the triangle resting on them, so solid, and I traced the lines with my fingers. Exactly right, said Mr. Powell. Do you see how he used the horizon lines and the triangles for the arc to turn? It would have been wrong. It would have weighed against the downward motion. But for these birds, it's perfect. The artist gives them a stable horizon that you can't help but see. So I spread the paper across the glass case. Draw the horizons at midpoint lightly. Then we'll add in the lines for the two puffins and see where they intersect. I suppose it only would be a matter of time before Lil found me in the library. I didn't hear her come up the stairs. I was trying to trace the triangle and figure out how the Audubon made you in a triangle without drawing a triangle, and even while sticking things outside it, like that stupid foot of that stupid puffin on the right was trying not to drown. This wasn't easy work, so I was concentrating pretty hard, and that explains what happened next. Your tongue sticks out of your mouth when you draw. I looked up. It does not. It does too. Your tongue sticks out of your mouth when you draw. That's why you drool. She pointed to the paper. There it is. There's the drool, she said. It isn't drool, I said. Maybe it's because of that funny thing you do with your Adam's apple. Is there something you want? Mr. Powell said that you were up here drawing and that you were pretty good, so I came up to see if you were. She looked at my large-billed puffins. Miss Merriam says you're a hoodlum in training. What does Miss Merriam know? Well, what are these lines here for? Nothing, just something a hoodlum in training would draw, I guess. She put her hands to her hips. You don't have to be angry with me. I'm not the one who said that. You're the one who told me about it. She sniffed. Maybe she's right and I was wrong. I told my father that whoever robbed the deli, it wasn't you, even when he thought it might be. But maybe you did do it. Maybe you are a hoodlum in training. Maybe you're just a drooling hoodlum. She turned and went back down the stairs. Her hair waved back and forth with each step. And when her head was level with the floor, I said, Lil! And she stopped. She looked up at me. I'm sorry about what my jerk brother did to those daisies. She looked up at me for a little more while. Mr. Powell was right, she said. And then she was gone. And at that moment, I went back to drawing. I erased the 3 triangles I had used to guide where I put the birds. And then I looked up over at those stairs. And Lil, I thought, was... at that moment, I realized that Mr. Powell thought I was pretty good. And Lil thought I was pretty good, too. I tried to remember last time anyone told me I was pretty good at anything. Do you know how that feels to be told you're pretty good at something? So I went back to drawing. And I kept my tongue in my mouth. No more drooling. But the police, they came back to the dump twice more. The first time they came with Mr. Spicer so that he could identify my brother, which he could. My brother swore up and down that he didn't break into anyone's store, but Mr. Spicer didn't listen. Mostly because he was looking at me, and he didn't look happy. The second time the police came back, my father was there, and he swore up and down at them until one of them took a step closer so that he was practically standing on top of my father's feet and said that if my father wanted to say one more thing, just one more thing, he would have to say it in a jail cell. And I could see my father's hand at that moment beginning to twitch with anger. The whole time the police were there, I sat there with my mother on the couch. The police only came 2 other times, And since they couldn't prove anything, they just stopped coming. Their last line to my brother was, "We'll be keeping an eye out." You could tell they thought he was guilty as sin, and usually this was a bad way to describe my brother. Usually it wasn't a bad way to describe my brother, but not for this case. So he wasn't arrested. Still, word got around town anyways. And that's how it is in a small town like stupid Marysville. That's how it is in a small town like stupid Marysville. All you have to do is spit on a sidewalk and the whole town will figure out that you're the kind of guy who might commit homicide. And everyone in your family is likely to be just the same. You could see it in the eyes of the mailman. You could see it in the eyes of the guy who came in to collect our rent. You could see it in the eyes of Miss Miriam, who was sure now that I was no longer a hoodlum in training. Even the eyes of the priest at St. Ignatius, who asked my mother her name when we were when we went for our first mass in stupid Marysville, and then right away he looked down at me like I was the one with the twisted criminal mind, and not my brother. You could see in the eyes of Mr. Spicer, who didn't say much when I came back that first Saturday for deliveries, but who looked at me in a new way. A look that told me that I could let Mrs. Windermere put her bill on account. He would ride up there from some other time to collect the money. You could see it in the eyes of Mrs. Mason, who didn't invite me in for chocolate donuts anymore, even though she had ordered 2 dozen. You could see it in the eyes of Mr. Loeffler, who didn't have any chores for me. "Thanks anyway, not today," he said. And you could see it in the eyes of Mrs. Doherty, who kept her kids back for the door like I was contagious and who didn't even answer the door. Her husband came to answer the door instead, Mr. Doherty. He just happened to be the policeman. You could probably also see in the eyes of Mrs. Windermere, except she never stopped typing while I put her groceries away. I hate this stupid town. And you could see it in the eyes of the secretary, the main office of Washington Irving Junior High School that first day too, and in the eyes of Principal Petey, who came out of his office so that he could identify me better if he had to pick me up out of a lineup. And you could see in the eyes of the guidance counselor who worked on my schedule, handed it to me, hesitated, and then decided to walk me into my homeroom because she said I didn't know my way around the school yet. But honestly, if you ask me, it was probably because she thought I was going to rob some lockers while I was passing by them. You could also see it in the eyes of my teacher, Mr. Barber in geography, who handed out brand new textbooks while holding a huge cup of coffee and who made us all swear that we were going to keep our new textbooks neat and clean like they were Joe Pepitone's cap or something, and who paused a couple seconds before he handed that new book to me because he probably thought I was going to just throw it in the gutter like it was some type of piece of junk. Mr. McElroy in world history announced that we were going to start by studying the barbarian hordes of Western Russia. And then she looked at me. Miss Cowper in English, her first words were, "This fall we'll be reading Jane Eyre by Miss Charlotte Bronte. And I'm not naive enough to believe that you will all like it." And at that moment, she looked right at me again. "This is original novel, is over 400 pages long. So no groaning, please. You are not cattle being led to slaughter, but you will be reading an abridgment. Even this is 160 pages long, though, but that should not discourage you. Those of you with character should see that this is a challenge. And those of you who are not so favored," and at that moment, she looked at me right again, and she didn't even finish her sentence. 160 pages of Jane Eyre I was going to have to read. Terrific. You could also see in the eyes of Mrs. Verney in math, who wouldn't call on me even when I raised my hands. Even when I raised my hand, and the only hand up was Lil's, and Mrs. Verney had already called on her twice. When Lil got called on again, she looked back at me and then turned to Mrs. Verney and said, "I think he also knows the answer." But Mrs. Verney's face got all pinchy and she said, "I will choose who to speak to in this classroom, Miss Spicer." And she went on so that no one else could even answer a question if they wanted to. X minus 17, by the way. You could see in the eyes of Coach Reed also in Phys Ed, who lined us up in the platoons. He had just got back from being a sergeant in Vietnam, and he still had his army crew cut, but he told in his sergeant's voice that I'd better not to try pull any funny business in his class. No siree! Just before he toured us through that locker room, taking us back to his office that was also forbidden to all students, and then told us to shoot baskets for the rest of the period. And that's how it went, until I got to Mr. Ferris's science class. And I'm not lying, he was wearing a white lab coat, and I couldn't believe it. He had dark glasses on a chain loop around his neck. Don't people know how stupid that looks? It looks worse than a large-billed puffin. His hair was cut like it had just gotten back from Vietnam too, and up on the lab table in front of the class, he had a toy horse that he was rocking back and forth like he was talking with us. His name is Clarence. I don't know why he named it that, so please don't ask me. Mr. Ferris told us how we were going to have a lab partner to do experiments and create vacuums and aspirin tablets and investigate the concept of masses versus weight, and how we'd have to measure the whole metric system, and we didn't need to fuss about it because it was for our own good, and how the first thing we needed to do was become familiar with the periodic table starting with H for, does anyone know? He asked. Hydrogen, said Lil, who turned out to be in every one of my classes except for PE. Of course. Did I tell you that she has green eyes, by the way? Because her eyes are very green. Right, said Mr. Ferris, and he started Clarence rocking happily. Terrific again. Physical science was the last period of the day, and when that bell rang, everyone gathered up their books. And I'm not lying, I was really careful with geography, the story of the world. And I was heading to their lockers when Mr. Ferris asked me to wait for a moment. You think there was a single eye that wasn't looking at me when they left? Even Lil's? They probably figured that Mr. Ferris was going to tell me that I better not try to pull any funny business in his class. No, sorry, Buster. I thought if I had to hear that again, I'd start plummeting into the sea. Doug Swiatek, do you know the basic principle of physical science? Was this a trick? No, I said sort of slow. He rocked Clarence. The basic principle of physical science is this. Two bodies cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Do you understand this principle? Yeah, I mean, I think so, I said. Do you understand what this principle means? I shook my head. I didn't. It means, Doug Swiatek, that when you're in my classroom, you are not your brother. Mr. Ferris started Clarence rocking again, and at that moment I felt the horizon settle. That next Saturday, after a week of being my brother in everyone's classes except for Mr. Ferris, I found Lil waiting for me by the large bill puffins when I came back from the deliveries. You can't really say that they're beautiful, can you? They're not, I said. She looked down at the birds. I didn't mean to embarrass you in math. Everyone knows that Mrs. Vernier is mean, but I didn't think the other teachers would also. They're all jerks, Lil. It doesn't matter, though. She reached out her hand. You're right. It doesn't matter. Let's shake on that. You know, maybe the puffin in the water isn't bobbing around like a chump just because he's trying not to drown. Maybe he's swimming, but he has no idea what to do because there's this other puffin standing beside him. And maybe she's a girl puffin, and no matter how large that large-billed puffin looks to us, they probably look pretty good to each other. And so the puffin in the water is looking at that girl puffin standing next to him. And he doesn't know what to do because suddenly he's thinking, I should tell her she has the most beautiful green eyes in the world. But he doesn't know how to say it. So he just bobs in the water like a chump he is. You're supposed to shake my hand, she said. And that's exactly what I did. And after she left, I worked on my drawings of the large-billed puffin. And even though her round eyes were looking away and out of the picture, I decided to change one small thing. So when Mr. Powell came up to see how I was doing, he looked at them, then at me, and then back at them. It seems like these two birds like each other, he said. Maybe they do, I said. And a week later, while we were taking another try at the puffins, you can't believe how hard it is to make a puffin not look like a chump. I told Mr. Powell about Miss Cowper and Charlotte Bronte and Jane Eyre. And Mr. Powell wanted me to work on the bills for the feats, and since they were crux points in the composition, he said, artists know what that means, by the way. If you guys don't know what a crux point is, artists will know. Sorry that you guys don't. But it was hard to make these look right, mostly because they look so stupid. Jane Eyre, he said. Jane Eyre, he said again. Yes, the original novel was over 400 pages long. He nodded. Yes, we have to read an abridgment, and it's still 160 pages long, though. And he nodded again. I'm not reading it, I said. Mr. Silence, why, Tuck? If it's an assignment, I'm not reading it. So I went back to getting the feet right, and then the stupid bills. I can help, Mr. Powell said after a bit. I can't get this one foot that's underwater right. With Jane Eyre, he said. I looked up at him. I don't need any help with Jane Eyre because I'm not going to read it. We didn't talk about Jane Eyre anymore, and I went back to the puffins. And I know you think you know why I don't want to read Jane Eyre, but to be honest, that's none of your business, is it? And when I got home from the library, my mother was cooking everything in sight. Here are the stats for what was on the kitchen table and on the counter. 3 loaves of fresh baked white bread. 1 angel food cake with chocolate icing dripping down its sides, which was Lucas's favorite. Probably 200 carrots that she sliced. Probably 300 green beans that she'd cut. Probably 400 yellow beets that she'd cut. And 3 dozen ears of corns, which were shucked. 35 patties of hamburgers already cooked and wrapped in tinfoil. And 1 bowl of Italian macaroni salad. 2 bowls of German potato salad. 1 bowl of green grapes. 2 platters of tomatoes sliced. And 1 platter of onions sliced. Mom, I said. Everything was piled on top of everything else. Bacon was frying on the stove. She was cutting up canned peaches and pears to go with the 3 chilled Jello salads. Oh, Dougie, I'm so glad you're home. Look at this. And she held out an envelope. There was a U.S. Army insignia in the left-hand corner. It's got to be Lucas, I said. But the address isn't in his handwriting, she said. And she was right. She went back to cutting the peaches and pears into smaller and smaller pieces. The liquid Jello was cooling on the stove. You better open it, I said. You open it, she said. So I opened the letter and I took it out. It was in script, so it was really hard to read, and I held it out for her. She looked at me and turned to wash her hands and looked out the window, turned back and looked at the letter and finally took it. Her terrified eyes. And then she read out the most important parts. That a friend of Lucas was writing a letter for him. That Lucas had been wounded pretty badly, but he was mostly okay. That he would be home in a couple months, maybe 3, maybe even a little more, depending on how things went. You know, the Army. That he hoped that he wouldn't mind that he looked a little bit different. Everyone who comes home from Vietnam does look a little bit different, though, don't they? It also said that Lucas couldn't wait to see us. She held the letter against her chest, and she looked up at me, and she closed her eyes. What is it? He says he can't wait to see us. She put her hands to her face. Mom? And he says he loves us. She opened her eyes and looked at the letter again and folded it and put it back in its envelope. She put it up on the window ledge over the kitchen sink. You know how a smile like that? Do you know how you could be smiling like that and sobbing all over the peaches and pears and still be beautiful? Well, my mom could. Guys, that is the end of chapter 3. Whew. I hope everyone, once again, is still doing well. I hope you enjoyed that read aloud. A couple things I do want to bring your guys' attention to. First off, one thing I didn't say in our pre-thing is that at the end of our last chapter, Doug began to draw. That is going to be something Doug's going to keep doing throughout this entire book. I want you guys to be thinking about why drawing is something important to Doug. And also why, so far, Mr. Powell has been such an important person in Doug's life as well. So that's one thing I want you to think about. I want you to think about how the different teachers have been acting towards Doug at school. And also, why was Mr. Ferris different? Like, what did Mr. Ferris do? First, at the orientation, like, how was Mr. Ferris's orientation different from Principal Petey's? Also, why is Mr. Ferris a better role model so far than all the others? What is the difference there? Finally, Doug has a secret, and I don't know if you guys caught up on this secret or not yet, but it has definitely been pretty nicely foreshadowed probably 5 or 6 times in this book so far. So, what I'd like you guys to do, even on the page, I'm going to be asking this throughout the week, but I want you guys, if you know, what do you guys, have you picked up on yet? What is Doug's secret? What is the thing that he has not told us yet? That there's definitely been a ton of foreshadowing to, but it's something about Doug that he's hiding from us, something that maybe he's even a little bit embarrassed of. With that in mind, guys, once again, please stay safe. I hope everybody has a great week, and please take care, everybody. Take care. Bye.